Hello and welcome to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. Our guest today is Bruce Brenneise, the artist on such titles as Numenera, Slay the Spire, and many other gaming-related projects, including the Gabriel Knight Temptation graphic short story. Thanks for joining us today, Bruce.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Hello, Bruce. Nice to hear from you.
Good to hear from you, Paul.
Let's start from the beginning. How long have you been working as a visual artist, and how did you get into it?
It's been a goal for quite a few years. After college, when I determined that it was a little difficult to get into the industry at that point, my program wasn't really connected directly to gaming, so there wasn't like a natural bridge. So I actually went off and lived in China for a bit, and then eventually came back in 2012. I came back to the US, and I decided at that time that I wasn't quite ready to get into the industry, but that I wanted to prepare myself. And so that's about the time that I started working with Phoenix Online Studios on some of their fan projects. And I started preparing, and then more recently, I guess in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working professionally, freelance, on some of those projects that you already named.
Mm-hmm. And you draw a lot of inspiration from a lot of the classic games.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up with a lot of those classic Sierra games in particular. After, I would say, starting with a lot of shareware stuff first, and then my first big box game was actually King's Quest VI. So the really painterly backgrounds that they used for the games in that era, like the early Quest for Glory games up through 4, the first Gabriel Knight, King's Quest 5 and 6, like that kind of era was very influential. I love that look, like you're wandering around in a painting almost. It's just so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So it's I guess we know where you stand on the whole EGA versus VGA debate then.
Oh yes. I get it that everyone's got their own artistic taste, and I respect that. Like, personally, EGA is definitely not for me. I may have said something along the lines of, makes the eyes bleed, but I appreciate that other people appreciate it. I think I didn't mind it at the time when I was playing some of those games, but when I first saw those beautiful backgrounds in like King's Quest 6, I was hooked. I'm like, this is another level.
Mm-hmm.
Never going back. And so that's where I take my inspiration from.
I obviously see the whole, there's something really fascinating about getting so much out of so little, but I'm pretty sure you can't get away with only 16 colors on your artwork.
Well, the equivalent is that actually a lot of painters do use limited palettes.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes it can actually give a painting a lot of unity. Like even like a monochromatic palette, or just a palette that has a few different colors, and then you mix them, of course. Mm-hmm. So that's where you get the variations, but there's only so many variations when you have like maybe 3 or 4 colors that you're working with. So there's definitely an equivalent in terms of more painterly artwork. And again, I can definitely appreciate working with a limited palette, and how they use dithering and such in the EGA classic games. It's just the way that they blend and the effects that you can get with the VGA just appeals to me so much more.
Every time I go to paint, and you mentioned blending colors, which kind of opens up, like you say, a whole nother world as far as working with a palette. I like how you said it unifies it, gives it, a general constant theme. I just struggle painting. First of all, being left-handed, I always drag my bloody hand across it. But every time I go to blend, it just turns either gray or brown. So I knew it wasn't for me. And something I admire so much about your work is how you're able to blend colors, like fading in and fading out. But a quick question, since we're kind of on an EGA, VGA topic real quickly, have you ever, because I ain't seen it personally, but have you ever dabbled in pixel art?
Not that is placed a pixel at a time, or at least not since I was a kid. Like, I think, when I was, I don't know, like middle school age or something, I think I got my hands on some sort of program that allowed you to place things pixel at a time, and I would make like little tarot cards, but I haven't done anything of that nature. I have done some work for the fellows at Infamous Quests, and their games are fairly pixelized, but
Mm-hmm.
more of a VGA look than the EGA sort of style.
Mm-hmm.
So when I had to do art for those games, my approach was to paint like I normally would, but then just resize it down so that everything became pixelized. And
Mm-hmm.
I would see if there were any problems that developed, like if it became unclear, and then I would, go back and change something as necessary to make it clearer at the pixel size that it needed to be.
Mm-hmm. So is your process generally do you do a painting first and then touch it up in computer, or is it all digital?
My commercial work is 100% digital, so
Wow.
that's all Photoshop. Yeah.
Wow, I can't even
Yeah.
begin to imagine how to even start on something like that. Like that's just beyond my scope of comprehension.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that at all. Actually, looking at your website right now, and it's just, I mean, it looks, almost it looks like oil on canvas. Basically, it's just beautiful. I'm kind of in shock, honestly, that you said that it's all through Photoshop. It's amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Photoshop is an incredibly versatile program. You can do a lot with it, and some of the biggest name artists, currently working on things like Magic the Gathering or various computer titles, like they do most of their work digitally, and really it's part of it is down to the mentality when you're working in Photoshop, but you have a great appreciation for the classic paintings and you've studied them, you've done little studies and tried to work out sort of, like the color mixing or the compositional ideas of the master artists of hundreds and hundreds of years ago, then it's amazing what you can bring to your digital painting to essentially make it feel exactly like an oil or an acrylic. And usually when I go to conventions and I have some of my some of my paintings I have printed as canvas prints, and especially on the canvas, it just looks exactly like it was painted with oils or acrylics. And people are constantly asking me, "Oh, did you use oils or acrylics?" And I'm like, "Actually, digital." Except it's
Yeah.
still just
Yeah.
a process of one paint stroke at a time. Like, ultimately, it's not so different. There are certain things in digital that can be very efficient, but if you want it to look traditional, you still have to have a fairly traditional method of paint stroke, and change the color, change the warmth, change the lightness or the darkness of it, and so on.
Right, yeah. I feel if I was to see one of your paintings on canvas, I would need like a red velvet rope to keep me from like poking and prodding at it to just double check that it's not really
Yeah.
paint.
So Numenera, I believe, is a tabletop RPG.
That's correct. Yes.
So do you know very much about it? Like how is it different from, say, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder?
I've never actually had the chance to play the game, so I don't know all of the ins and outs. It differs exactly. What I do know is that Monty Cook, the designer who created that system and created that setting, he actually used to work at Wizards of the Coast on Dungeons and Dragons. I think he left, I want to say, like around maybe the 3.0 or 3.5 versions of Dungeons and Dragons, maybe something like that. I know there was a bit of drama at the time
Mm.
regarding how that company was going. So a lot of top designers actually left and started their own gaming firms. So I think he probably took, some of the ideas that he had about, disagreements maybe about the direction of Dungeons and Dragons, and he created a different kind of system.
Hmm.
And from what I've seen, it's supposed to facilitate more of the storytelling side of Dungeons and Dragons. So, I one of these days I'd love to get to play it, but so far I'm just so busy making more paintings for it.
Hmm. And how's the process working with them? Like, do you get a lot of creative license with how you do the drawings, or is it very guided? Like, do they tell you what they want and how to do something, or are you pretty much given a lot of creative freedom in that regard?
Um, Numenera, I had an amazing amount of creative freedom, actually. The first five pieces that I worked on in particular, they just told me, go to town, do your thing. Um, I guess you could call it a blue sky project. The game was already established. It had been out since 2012. So, I had gone in thinking that maybe they would want something illustrated that is in the game but hadn't been previously illustrated. And they were looking for all new concepts pretty much. So I submitted a bunch of ideas that I came up with, and they approved most of them. And then I just went to town on those and came up with my own stories. And, they're just looking for inspiring, weird scenes that people can say, oh yeah, maybe I can build my own story about that place.
Hmm.
Like it doesn't have to be set in stone by the rule book, as it were.
Right, right. I'm really glad you said that there at the end because as I look at some of your artwork on your website, and everybody go check it out at brucebrenneise.com. But as I look at your artwork, it every different piece seems like there's room for allegory. Like I could look at one of your pieces and feel like I could, come up with my own short story with some sort of hidden meaning, and it's just amazing how the imagination wanders. And I won't go too much into detail on the paintings. Obviously, this is a audible medium, not a visual one, so I won't drive everyone crazy by trying to explain things. But you have one called "The Trail of the Dream Titans," and just for people listening, it's well, actually, Bruce, probably better if you kind of explain it, because to me it's just fascinating. This giant, monolith, almost I guess like a pyramid, but it's got like almost insect-like legs and a tiny city in the background.
Yeah, that's actually a really great example because that was one of those first five pieces that I did for them. And certainly those were not the only ones that I've done for them where they were very hands off. But that was one of the very first. I think that was the second piece that I worked on for them. And yeah, it's a night scene with a pyramid, but there's a creature inside of the pyramid that's basically a giant creature using the pyramid almost as a shell.
All
And so
right.
we don't know if this is exactly a situation where the creature just normally wanders around like that. It's got all of these tiny, relatively small crab legs underneath. The whole structure trundles along the planes. Um, we don't know exactly if that's just how it normally wanders around day to day, or if this is just once in a while it will get up and walk away, or
Right.
if this is like an Lovecraftian elder god that is escaping from its prison. A lot of it is left up to the imagination of the viewer.
Hmm.
There's also a small village in the foreground, and there's a trail of glowing blue uh, chemicals that are coming out of the back of this creature, and they're flooding down through some canals or rivers in this plain. And the people have created like a dam or a dike along this river, and they're collecting the chemicals, and they're making use of them. And so I came up with this idea. Monty Cook Games had a few bits of feedback along the way just to kind of hone it. But generally, even in terms of feedback, they've been fairly hands off. Um, and one of their legendary game designers, Bruce Cordell, who's done a number of like very famous D&D modules. He also used to work for Wizards of the Coast. Saw this painting that I did, and he was very inspired. He post about even, and he was the one who came up with Trail of the Dream Titans, and he wrote up like a little adventure module based on my painting. So that was a huge honor.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I could see why. I mean, the mind just wanders, and at first I was wondering if the city would be terrified of the creature if it was going at it, and then, like you said, I noticed that liquid, if you will, it's kind of a bioluminescent sort of liquid, is seemed to be almost being harvested by the city, but it's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. And to ask a proper question instead of just throwing comments out there, I guess, right? It's good for substance to ask you things. I was wondering also about your artistic freedom, or the pregame, if you will, when it came to the Gabriel Knight comic.
That one I was mostly a colorist on, so I wasn't the one coming up with the concepts or anything like that. To my knowledge, Phoenix Online and Jane Jensen had already written the short story. I think I don't know exactly how it came about, but I believe that the 20th anniversary Gabriel Knight might have been funded, and I think that the little short story prelude for a potential Gabriel Knight 4 hook was kind of something to the backers, at least as far as I understand it. So they had this short story already out there, and I think it was available, and they decided that they wanted to make it into a graphic short story because all of the Gabriel Knight games always came with that little comic, basically, or like a little illustrated story, like a kind of intro chapter for the games. I don't know if you guys, have the big boxes or any of the materials for those games, but they always came with that. So they wanted to do something like along those lines. So they had the script. They had another artist. I'm blanking on her name at the moment. Forgive me. I believe an Italian lady. She drew out. She did all the line work for it, and then I came in and I painted over the line work, and so I did the cover as well as the coloring the interiors, and so that one was pretty well set, actually, except for the cover. I basically came up with the cover in the course of a day or two. Wow. It came together as a finished piece over the course of one day, pretty much, going on late with Phoenix Online's art director, and I think there were a couple people who were that while I worked on that, and they got some other stuff done that they needed to get done around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's a beautiful cover, kind of a nighttime winter scene. I love your lighting, the way the moon glows and the lantern on the house. And only because I'm looking at it, her name for closure is Pavanito.
Pavanato.
There we
Yeah,
go.
well, I think it's Elise, maybe, or something like that, or Elisa. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
we got half the name in there. So, considering, like you said, the drawing was done, the story was done. Were they kind of over your shoulder about how you colored it, or was that pretty much left up to you?
That one was kind of a group process. It was a little bit more of a team effort, and that, in my experience, tended to fit with how Phoenix Online generally does stuff. They always have like team meetings on Skype on like a weekly basis at the very least, where everyone shows what they've been working on, and you get feedback from a lot of different people who may be part of the process. So there was generally a fair bit of feedback on those pieces.
Lovely.
And fair enough. I hadn't done colorist, I hadn't been a colorist on a graphic novel project before, so I was coming in just applying my knowledge of color theory and Photoshop painting to a task that I hadn't tried before.
Right. I absolutely nailed it. It's beautiful. I mean, in all your work, one constant thing that I'm so drawn to is your lighting, and oftentimes your contrast of lighting. One of your works is called A Golden Evening, and it's just all these warm kind of earth tones, and then this just contrast, beautiful, turquoise. I'm not sure the actual color, but this just bright,
Sure,
beautiful
that's pretty
blue.
close, yeah.
Right on. I got something right there. When I was when I was a wee little lad, I used to call it Turk Boys, and I took a lot of shite for that all growing up. Like I should.
That's a
start,
different industry.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a boy band with the Turk Boys. Um,
And so on the topic of processes, how are things possibly different or even similar when working with Infamous Quest with their games?
Those ones, again, well, actually, those ones are maybe a little bit more like the process of working on Numenera, in the sense that they didn't tend to need too much feedback. As the story and elements that they needed me to paint were already fairly determined. So there was like kind of an emblem and a few other details like that. They just gave me some written details to work from. And there may have been like a few tweaks needed at the end after I handed in the pretty much finished art assets, but there wasn't too much back and forth on those. In fact, I just worked with Stephen on another piece for Rome to Ruin, so there will be at least one of my pieces in that game coming up. Or at least I think it's in Rome to Ruin, if I remember right.
Probably. I think that's the one he's working on right now.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that. And could you let us know what previous titles of Infinite Quest that we could find your work in?
Well, the only other title from Infamous Quest that I've got work in is Order of the Thorn.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's what I forget what the subtitle for that one is. It's like the King's Challenge, I want to say. And you don't encounter my work until the very, very end of the game. There's like basically some backstory that you encounter right near the very end, and so they wanted some illustrations that kind of look a little bit like medieval woodcut illustrations, just for that last piece.
Right, I got it. That's actually a lovely bit of accidental marketing you've done for them, so all the listeners know that you got to stick through it and get to the end to see that.
Well, they're lovely. They're lovely people, so they deserve it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely love their work. Yeah. I've got a question for you. I think I've either read or heard from you mention in the past, perhaps on the guild itself. I'm not sure that you were a big fan of Sir Terry Pratchett.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's one of my all-time favorite authors. Obviously, it was a huge loss for frankly, the world when he passed some years back. I actually did a little piece, when I was sort of getting my sadness out of me around that time. I did a little painting that has one of the swamp dragons holding Terry's signature black hat in his mouth, and he's got like the big soulful eyes like those swamp dragons always do. And there's a few other little little Easter eggs in there for other Pratchett fans.
Hmm.
But yeah, he's absolutely a huge inspiration. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's lovely. I was just looking him up, little uh, research, whatever, and I didn't know that he was knighted, but he was back in 2009, I believe. So of course, you're hearing the way I talk. I was very excited to announce him as Sir Terry Pratchett, and I think it's lovely he was
Yes.
able to be knighted before he passed away. God bless you, Mum. What I did want to ask is, obviously, he's was knighted for his works in literature, more so than how the listeners of this podcast probably know him, which would be his Discworld games. Obviously,
Hmm.
the books as well. Check them out. Do some reading; it's good for you. But that said, were you a particular fan of his games, or was it mostly based on his other works?
It was entirely based on his books. I mean, it's an amazing series. Um, there's so much in there. I actually wasn't even aware that there were any Terry Pratchett games until relatively recently.
Hmm.
I saw that there were. I mean, there's more than one. I mean, the one that I was aware of looked like it had an interface based uh, on the games that let's see, there was like a Terry Brooks game and like a Shannara game, and there was a Piers Anthony Xanth game, Demons Don't Dream, and of course I'm very familiar with his works as well. And I played the Xanth game. I've never played the Terry Brooks game or the Terry Pratchett Discworld game, but it looks like it's kind of a similar concept.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I've only played the first one. I'm not sure if there's three or four off the top of my head. And kind of almost artistically reminded me of the Simon the Sorcerer games. Just
Hmm.
kind of fantasy mixed with a little bit of cartoony charm to it or whatever. But yeah, definitely enjoyed the first one, and like the rest of us, just 100 games in queue to play, them included. But anyway, yeah, I had to get that out of the way. I was very, very curious how you felt about him and his games.
What is your favorite game?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I mean, come on, like there's so many games. You have to divide it by subgenre. I mean, favorite.
We have to ask the hard questions here.
Sure, sure. Um, boy, definitely high up the list are the Quest for Glory games, of course.
Hmm.
They're probably, out of all of the Sierra games, that's probably my very favorite series.
Yeah.
Um, I am a big fan of RPGs, so Ultima is also a important series to me. And
Yeah.
the last one I would probably mention at the top of the list would be Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri,
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
because I have sunk so much time into that, and I can pretty much pull the quotes from it off the top of my head at this point. But it's just a beautifully written game, and the gameplay is amazing and addictive too.
Hmm. And do you find especially ever since becoming a professional visual artist, do you find that your enjoyment of games now is very heavily impacted by the visual designs?
I would say that for the most part, I don't get to play a lot of games anymore
Right.
because I'm too busy making art for games. I mean, that's kind of that's the problem with becoming a game dev. Like, you oftentimes don't get to play a lot of games. Um, certainly as an artist, like I'm just kept so busy that I
Yeah.
have a lengthening list of games that I'd love to play. Um, Top of the list is probably the new one from Laurie and Corey Cole, Hero U.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten to see a little bit of it. My sister's played through it like 9 times already, and I haven't gotten to play it through a single time yet. So that's number one on the list of games that I'd like to play when I have the chance.
Yeah, perfect choice for a number one. Yeah, you're definitely in for a treat next time. Next time you find time. But yeah, as you said, being a game dev, working in any sort of artistic industry is always that kind of cruel irony of not being able to take in or enjoy what you're putting your work towards, which is unfair at times. But I guess having working a bad thing.
And how long, let's say the piece that we were mentioning before, like how long did it take to make that from the first time you put the, I guess the pen to the pad to what completion?
I really don't. I don't do a good job of timing myself,
Mhm.
and my process tends to involve a lot of back and forth and taking breaks from the Cintiq to go and take a walk around, get some oxygen in the brain, and so on.
Of
So it's
course.
hard sometimes to determine billable hours, and I am not entirely sure on mine in many cases, but I would estimate that my average illustration might take somewhere between 30 and 60 hours.
Okay.
And that's just a very rough estimate. Honestly, a lot of pieces, I'll do a bit of work on one thing and then I'll switch and work on something else.
Of
And
course.
then I might come back to a piece. If it's a personal piece, I might be working on that thing for months, but not just straight through. It's, a bit here, a bit there. And I'm kind of a little bit of a scattered person anyway sometimes. Um, so it makes it really hard to determine exactly.
Hmm.
Right, fair enough. And while we're on sort of subject of your personal approach to things, I noticed a sort of theme, if you will, developing that I absolutely am enamored by, and it's uh, bear with me, I'll try and put it into words. It seems like a lot of like dawn of civilization or of rebirth, civilizations rising from nothing. And then this is an oxymoron, but some of the pieces almost seem like they're organic, but also a little cyberpunk. You know what I mean? Like, which again, cyberpunk usually is like
Sure.
technological future and this and that. Whereas yours, maybe it's the lighting, maybe it's a mix of unexplainable with ruins, things like that. But my basic curiosity is these giant kind of monolith structures that you create. Like you've got one was like a giant red wall at the border of the sea, and these pillars, these turquoise pillars coming out of the desert. Where does that come from inspirationally?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm dialed into that is also a big part of that setting that they're working on. Actually, I mean, I think you hit right on it. A lot of the work that I've been doing is really about the post-apocalyptic world. So
Right.
if we imagine, on into the future, our civilization will eventually come to its end, probably. Other civilizations may rise and fall in the meantime. But, in some far distant, weird future, the humanity in some form might continue. And what does that look like? And what kinds of high tech ruins do they live with? The scars of all the past civilizations, and how do they use that to build their own civilization? That I think is a very interesting concept and an interesting question, and it's something that I like to deal with in my work. And it's part of the Numenera setting because that one's a billion years in the future and many civilizations later, rather improbably, I guess, but fun regardless. I'm also working on my own Patreon project called the 12 Continents. That's a similar kind of concept, and it's something that I've been working on for maybe 12, 15 years, just writing short stories and coming up with ideas and kind of living in that headspace. So that would be why it's coming through in the work, some of the work that I do for clients and also the work that I do for myself. It's a really interesting theme.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. A lot of your works makes me want to take a saunter through them and just kind of take it in as like these giant, pantheons. Maybe like you said, from the civilization before the new one, and they're building a little city around it. To really dumb it down, just again, kind of for listeners, being an audible medium, and again, it's just really, really dumbing it down, not to compare to your artwork, but it reminds me of Planet of the Apes, where they come across the fallen Statue of Liberty, and it just kind of has this odd, like, it was from your ancestors, and it's just something very magical about it that I certainly appreciate. And since you mentioned so that's what I'd done said. Since the thing that you said was Patreon, there we go. Since you mentioned that,
Yes.
where can listeners find your Patreon?
Well, you just have to look for my name on Patreon. And the problem here, as you mentioned, since this is an audible medium and my last name is very unique, I'm going to have to at least spell it out for you, for listeners. So my first name is Bruce, of course, that's simple enough, but the last name is Brenneise, starting Brenneise. And you can find me on Patreon. My website is brucebrenneise.com. So I'm very easy to find on the internet because my name is so unique, but it's also a little
Mhm.
difficult for people because my name is so unique. It's a blessing and a curse.
Mhm. And do you have any social media pages or anything? Like, there's the time to get in all your plugs and shout outs if you like.
I'm let's see, I think if I can remember them all, I'm Bruce Draws on Twitter. I'm Works on Facebook, or you can just search for my name on Facebook. I'm Bruce Brenneise on Instagram. I think I'm Bruce Draws Worlds on Tumblr. Not that I really do all that much with Tumblr these days. It just gets whatever I send to Instagram also goes there. And Bruce Brenneise at Patreon.
Mhm.
So it's literally just patreon.com/Bruce Brenneise, and you can find my 12 continents work there.
Beautiful. And I've got about two more. I'm not sure about Rick. I've got about two more questions for you. But before I do, just you lot out there, really please go to brucebrenneise.com. You could spend 45 minutes easy just staring at these beautiful works that he's done. They're absolutely amazing. So please go check them out. They're gorgeous. Bruce, I've got just kind of two daft, silly questions for you, if you will. All right, three. I'll make them kind of quick. I noticed in your write-up that you've got a fascination, or at least a collection of carnivorous plants.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a small collection that I keep in my studio room, and yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of amusing keeping some sundews and some pitcher plants around. They do occasionally eat the odd fly or mosquito that makes it into the house, so I appreciate them for that too.
I tried them Venus flytraps. Terribly inefficient way of dealing with the problem, but they're nice to have around.
Yeah, the fly traps look really cool and they're very inefficient. If you ever want to deal with a fruit fly problem via carnivorous plants, I highly recommend you get sundews and pitcher plants instead, especially the sundews. They'll catch so many of those things. It's pretty cool.
I might actually just jotted that down. I've got a large fruit fly problem, but not that the listeners care about my fly problem, so I'll move on to the next. I need someone to talk to about this. No, so last two. Uh, yeah, you specifically mentioned. First of all, I love your hat. I saw just a 2 minute clip of you on YouTube talking, and I was like, "That's a bloody cool hat." Like, I like hats quite a bit myself personally. But you mentioned that you get your hats from the Amish. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Um, I grew up in southern Michigan, and it's not too far from there to a place called Shipshewana in Indiana that has a large Amish population. And actually, when I came back from China, I was briefly down in that area, and I found this place that sells hats exactly the way I like them. And so I stocked up on a few from there, and then another trip more recently, I stocked up on a few more because they do get pretty weather beaten and dirty after a while. So I think I'm on something like my fourth or fifth um, Indiana Jones kind of style fedora hat, and I've been wearing that style for boy uh, quite a while. Let's say since maybe 2003, 2004, something like that.
That's really cool. Yeah, I had to ask because it was specifically pointed out, and I'm a bit fascinated with the Amish. I don't think I'm mature enough to ever visit them. I'd be tempted to bring like an old iPhone and just like drop it on the ground and see if that like destroy the society
And
or
it
something
probably gets
terrible.
smashed by one of their horse buggies coming along.
one of the thousand Abe Lincolns there. Is that a bad thing to say? Well, you'll edit if it was. Sorry.
All right.
My 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 last question for you, mate. You had mentioned that you spent a lot of time in China. And to transition into that, because I can't not say it. Oh, I'm sorry, Rick. Since you spent since you spent time in China, I was just wondering if you do care to share. Kind of what brought you there. Can you speak any of the language? Anything like that.
Sure. 我会说一点点中文, which is to say I do speak a little, I do understand a little. I may be a little modest on that question because that is also the Chinese way. If anyone compliments you, you're really supposed to kind of do this thing where you look to each side and you say, "Nali, who are you talking about? You can't possibly be praising not so good." Um,
I wouldn't do well
it's
there.
a it's a very tiny. Well, they know that Westerners are happy to brag about themselves. But yeah, I mean, after art school, when I sort of ran up against this hard wall of reality, like how do I get into the entertainment industry, games, like how do I do the sorts of things that I want to do? And it didn't seem like there was any ready path forward based on the skills I had acquired at college. And traveling's always been a huge passion of mine. I had a lot of Chinese friends in college as well, so I knew like a little bit of very basic survival Chinese already. But then I just got a job over there. I looked around, found a job teaching English. It's very easy to fall into if you're from one of the main English speaking countries. Like, basically they tend to just require a college degree and that's about it.
Oh, damn.
So looking well, now I can scratch my travel itch. I can go live in East Asia and travel to some of the surrounding countries and travel around. And it was just an amazing time. I met my wife there, and I traveled to like three or four, maybe five other countries that are nearby. And it's been a huge inspiration for my art.
So that looks to be about the time that we have for today, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Bruce.
Oh, well, it was absolutely my pleasure too. It was great to chat with you guys.
Mega, yeah. No, yeah, just want to extend what Rick said, only with more stuttering, and say it was a pleasure to learn about you and your methods and your approach and everything. And again, everyone go check out brucebrenneise.com and his Patreon, social media, etc. It's just gorgeous work.
Sweet. Well, one of these days we'll have to talk Slay the Spire.
Yes.
That's another big one.
Yes, I have that in my notes, but I just sort of I didn't have a specific question related to it because I don't know much about it, so I actually probably should have asked for an explanation. But yeah, we'll get you back on soon, and we'll talk more about that one.
We have a beautiful cliffhanger now because people are going to want to hear about that, and you will, but you got to stay tuned, for the next season of us with Bruce. But no, just thank you so much for being here, mate. Everybody out there, thank you for listening, and don't do murder.
Definitely not.
Thank you all for joining us at the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. If you would like to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, our social media contact information is in the episode description. Please feel free to continue the conversation by letting us know if you agree or disagree, if we missed anything, or if you think any of our information is inaccurate. If you would like to suggest an idea for an upcoming episode, please feel free to let us know, and priority for episode suggestions will be given to our Patreon subscribers. That's all for this week. Thank you all very much for tuning in.